Burnout. And we are live with Laura Putnam. Laura is somebody who I've been wanting to meet, and I got introduced to her. She is the author of the award winning Workplace Wellness That Works. So, very, very aligned with the Unhustle philosophy. She's a CEO and founder of Motion Infusion, which is a leading well-being provider. She does a lot of amazing work. Her work has been featured in places like the MSNBC, the New York Times, Fox News, ABC News, US News and World Report, and many, many other amazing places. So I'm excited to have a conversation with Laura about well-being in the workplace. Welcome, Laura.
Thanks so much, Milena. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So for taking a little bit of time to talk with the Unhustle community and share this message about well-being in the workplace. So why don't we kick it off with tell me the story a little bit behind why and how you started your company, Motion Infusion.
So I call myself a former competitive gymnast, former professional dancer, former urban public high school teacher, former international community organizer. I lived and worked in a small village in Ghana in West Africa, and now turned movement builder in the world of health and well-being. And there were a couple of things that really inspired me to start Motion Infusion. One was just this wake-up call when I went from being a student at Stanford University. I was on the women's gymnastics team there, and then I entered into the workforce. And I had no idea how much most jobs, particularly office jobs, make you sit all day. And it was really challenging for me. And so I kind of embarked on this career that had these wild swings from working in an office where I was, for example, I worked on the Senate Antitrust Subcommittee that was kind of more in line with what I studied in undergrad, which was international relations. But then wanting to be more in my body. So I had stints as a Pilates instructor, as a dancer, as I mentioned before. And it's so hard to bring those two together. And meanwhile, we all know that movement is one of the best things that we can do to not only get healthier, but to get happier and to get smarter. And I've seen it over and over again as a teacher. Whenever I would bring movement into a history class, my students would engage in a way that they wouldn't otherwise, particularly some of the students who had a harder time engaging with their schoolwork. But even one of the things that I found when I was a Pilates instructor is that there were people that I was working with who were not much older than me and had lost so much functionality, like basic things like having difficulty lifting their head off of a pillow if they were in a prone position because they were sitting so much. And I would say to them, it's great that you're here, but you really need to be moving the rest of the time. And almost uniformly, they would all say, I can't when I'm at work. So that's where I kind of decided, okay, I need to take this to the workplace if I really want to help more people to get more motion infusion, to get more well-being, and I need to look for a broader platform.
I mean, what you do is so, so important. And I feel guilty right now because I'm sitting with you, but I do have a standing desk. And so I kind of gravitate between standing and sitting. And I definitely notice a difference. Now, something really interesting, though. There are certain things that are really hard for me to do if I'm standing. Like I'm working on my book right now. So I can't really stand and write. I don't know why. But I can do a lot of other things. So I can talk to podcast interviews. I can do podcast interviews if I'm standing. So how do you take this into the workplace? So I want you to speak to that. And then isn't like sitting considered like worse than smoking for us?
So first of all, in response to that last question, yes. And in fact, there's a frightening study that came out of the University of Hong Kong finding that the effects of sitting too much is worse than the effects of smoking. it's hard to imagine that, right? And
Crazy.
I know. So, yeah. The let me tell you what too much sitting is it's likely as little as 3 hours a day. 3 hours a day. And meanwhile, the average American is sitting over 10 hours a day. And so it kind of, that here's something to think about when you're thinking, oh, I can't, it's hard for me to write when I'm standing. James Levine, who is a researcher at the Mayo Clinic, who's done a lot of work that I cite a lot, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but he actually wrote his book while he was on a treadmill desk. I could never do that. So I'm with you on that. I need to be sitting as well. But if it's any comfort for you, what I often advise people is that the best position is the next position. So in other words, you want to be thinking about switching it up over the course of the day, sitting down, sitting on a stool, standing up, walking around the block, lying down, just switching it up, even doing malasana, anything to kind of, the problem is that we kind of get stuck in one position. So even standing, if you're doing that all day, that's not great either. You just want to keep the body moving. So that's kind of my key message. Motion Infusion, the name of the company, is really around, it's really not just about exercising per se. Well, that's great. It's really more about infusing more motion into everything that you do. And it can be something as simple as, if I stand up here for a moment, right? And then sit back down. I'm, again, switching it up. The best position is the next position.
So how often do you recommend that people switch it up? So the idea is you incorporate movement throughout your day, which is great. You can do some push-ups, whatever you like you said. How often do you have to switch it up for it to be beneficial?
There's such a continuum on that. So the easy answer to that is, think about it. We evolved through movement. We were, as hunters and gatherers, we were walking up to 20 miles a day. Obviously, that's not realistic for many of us. So some helpful guidelines. One is to think about getting up at least every hour, if not every 30 minutes. And it can be something as little as, I'm going to stand up for 2 minutes. There was a study that came out of Stanford finding that just standing up for 2 minutes every hour, that alone helps to offset some of the negative effects of too much sitting. And there was another study that was really interesting where they had people stand up every hour and then do intensive exercise for 4 minutes, like running up and down the stairs kind of exercise for 4 minutes. And then they sit back down. So it's really thinking more about kind of offsetting the sitting that we're doing, which again, we're culturally mandated to sit. So it's really hard for each of us as individuals to really start to move as much as we should, and to sit less than we do right now.
I absolutely love what you're saying, because I actually moved to Baja, California, so I can be more active. Mm-hmm. And I lived in a place before in Lake Tahoe, which is active, but sometimes, it's a little chilly. You don't feel like going outside all the time. But here I'm just like, all right, let's go. And I know, because I have this watch here that tells me how active I am. So I know based on the watch that I'm a lot more active here. And I feel so much better because of that. More energy, more clarity, more creativity. All these things are starting to come back. And it just has to do with moving your body more, right?
Well, and it also goes to show just how powerful culture and environment are. So while we often hear the expression that we are creatures of habit, I would argue that, in fact, we're all more creatures of culture. So you drop someone into a different culture, a different environment, just like you're experiencing right now, and you're kind of swimming in different water. And that different
I'm literally swimming.
Right? And it pushes you toward engaging with more movement than you would otherwise. So if we look at these parts of the world, these so-called blue zones, and that where people are not only living but thriving into their hundreds, it's not because they're that much more motivated than the rest of us, or that they have the latest and greatest app, which they don't. It's just that they happen to be lucky enough to have been born into a blue zone where this is just normal. that you practice the words that Dan Buettner uses is natural movement, not so much exercise, but natural movement. And the research that he's done shows that people are moving on average about every 20 minutes. So that's kind of our ideal, if we could be moving every 20 minutes.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I'm originally from Bulgaria, so I grew up in a different culture from the US. Very few people in Bulgaria, I'm gonna say, actually exercise. Gyms. We now have, people used to laugh at me because I grew up ski racing, and so exercise has always been a part of who I am. But most people there, they're just like you said, natural movement. They're active. They walk because it's you live in a city. You walk a lot more. When I came to the States, I was like, okay, so we drive everywhere, we sit all day long, and then you go to the gym for an hour, and you get on the treadmill, and you call this a workout, and then you go home. When in reality, to your point, it's like having that natural movement throughout the day is a lot more beneficial.
Totally. And when you go to the gym, often you're taking the escalator to get there. I mean, it's so ironic, isn't it? My stepmother is actually from Poland, and, she hates exercise, but she's moving all the time. She just naturally walks her errands all the time. And she's in her 90s now, and she's doing great. So case in point, I think that we've really gotten confused about what the key issue is. What the research suggests, and this is coming from James Levine, who I mentioned earlier, is that actually the amount that we're exercising hasn't gone down that much. What's gone down is all of that incidental movement throughout the day. And he calls this EAT, exercise activity thermogenesis, which is kind of, I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to go to a yoga class. Kind of, that's EAT. Whereas NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, that's all of this other stuff that happens over the course of the day. And because of all of these labor-saving devices, whether it's our cars, our laptops, our washing machines, our heaters, these all represent lost opportunities to move. All of these places where we would be moving otherwise, but we're not now because of that labor-saving device.
So important. So let's shift gears a little bit here. Talk about the Great Resignation a little bit. What are you seeing from your point of view when you work with companies? I know I saw a study that said well-being is the number one factor as to why people are wanting to switch jobs or wanting to start a business and joining this Great Resignation. What are you seeing, and what's the emphasis there with the people that in the companies that you work with?
So it's so fascinating what's happened, isn't it? 4 million people on average have left the workforce every month since June of 2021. Just think about that. So one of the things that I talk about a lot, and one of the things that I'm really seeing kind of in the fallout from the pandemic, is that everybody has had this kind of existential moment where they have reflected on what matters most. And so the work that you do, kind of your own realization around, I don't want to live my life this way, this kind of hustle kind of way of living. I want to do just the opposite. And so I think what you have done and what you're sharing with people now is a microcosm of, and what your whole movement is about, is a microcosm of what so many people have been awakened to. So whether we're talking about the Great Resignation or now the Great Regret, where people have left their jobs and then they're like, oh crap, I don't like this new one. So those people who regret the jobs that they're in now, they're going to leave too. They're going to keep going. People are effectively voting with their feet. And they are voting for the things that they have always wanted. This is nothing new. The only difference is that people feel more empowered to be able to ask for what they want. And so it's not only well-being, but it's also human being. So I call about this kind of this transition in the field that I'm working in from wellness eat your vegetables, get your exercise, to well-being, all of these dimensions of well-being, career well-being, financial well-being, social well-being, emotional well-being, to now human being. So every single one of us want to have autonomy, for example. So one of the biggest things that's coming out is that people want flexibility. They don't want to be micromanaged. And again, they're in a position to be able to ask for that. Or things like feeling like you matter. That again is one of our deepest human needs. Or feeling like we have purpose. Or feeling like that we're deeply connected to the people that we work with, that we have not just a good friend, but a best friend at work. All of these are the kinds of things that people have always wanted, but they're now just in a position to be able to ask for it.
So in a way, it's really a human revolution.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Was that the motivation for you to write the book? And can you tell us a little bit more about workplace wellness that works? And why do most efforts fall short? And what can organizations do differently?
Yeah, I mean, really, the way I characterize, kind of define wellness or well-being or human being, whatever you want to call it, is really those things that enable us to be human. So as humans, we are naturally wired to move, but we happen to live in a culture that drives us to our chairs. As humans, we are naturally programmed to eat whole foods, but the unhealthy options, the ultra processed foods, are what are cheaper, more widely available. And this is what scientists characterize as so-called obesogenic environments, where the environments themselves are really the driving cause behind rising rates of obesity. Or we as human beings, we are wired to take time outs, but we feel cultural pressure to always be on. So again, your story is a perfect illustration of that. You said, you kind of called out this always on culture, and you said, I'm going to do it differently. And so really what the whole idea behind my book was like, hey, we've got a really great opportunity here. If all of us are living in this kind of increasingly toxic environment and culture, kind of this adapted Western lifestyle, which we know drives chronic conditions like heart disease and diabetes, every workplace has an opportunity to create something that is a little different. They have an opportunity to create an oasis of well-being, a sanctuary of well-being, so that every single person who works there, whether it's in person or it's virtual, they are enabled to be a little bit more healthy, a little bit more happy, a little bit more their best selves.
And I love your definition. You came up with this term of multipliers of well-being.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. So let's unwrap that term a little bit. What is a multipliers of well-being?
So I talk about this a lot in relation to managers. So a lot of these workplace wellness efforts, they first try to get the senior leaders on board, and then they kind of go straight to the bottom, and they're like, everybody else, you need to join this wellness program as well. But often the managers, kind of that middle layer, are left out. And what the research suggests, including our own published research, is that the manager is actually uniquely positioned within the workplace to either act as a multiplier of well-being, kind of really be that agent of change, start a movement of well-being within their team, or to do just the opposite, where they actually literally get in the way of their team members' engagement with their well-being. So for example, if you have a manager, a boss, who sends you late night emails, no matter how many wellness programs there are saying turn off your devices at night, most likely you will respond to that late night email, especially if you're a high performer. And in fact, there's studies showing that for every hour that a manager engages in after hours email time, that likely translates into an added 20 minutes of after hours email time for the team members. So every manager, they have a choice to make. Am I going to move to the right-hand side of the spectrum and really model well-being. So do, speak, and create, talk about it, and then create some team-based systems that help to normalize well-being within the context of my team. So I'm acting as that multiplier of well-being. Or am I going to just kind of shrug my shoulders and pretend like this wellness and well-being and human being stuff doesn't matter? That's not my job. And effectively act as a gatekeeper, unwittingly becoming a barrier to team members engaging with their well-being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Laura, you're doing amazing work. I'm so happy to connect with like-minded people on this journey. Thank you so much. Tell me what's coming up next for you. Did I see that you're working on another book?
I am. So next book is tentatively titled Born to Move, Told to Sit. Perfect circle back to the beginning of our conversation, but really starting to unpack how much the fact we know that it's one of the best things that we can do for our bodies and our brains and our states of mind, and yet we don't do it. We continue to provide individual solutions for something that's really more of a collective issue. That is, we are kind of told to sit. What's the first thing that we're teaching our kids when they come to school? We teach them to sit and be still. What do we ask people to do when they come in our homes or our office? We say, have a seat. Everything revolves around our chairs. And so therefore, really, we need to unpack what are all those forces that really keep us from moving. And then how can we take more of an outside in approach so that everybody is more enabled to move more, to close that gap from being born to move but told to sit, because of the community that they're in, because of the places where they go, whether it's school, whether it's work, because of the team that they're on, because of their boss, because of their teachers, because of their parents, so that each of us can effectively become our best selves.
Amazing. I can't wait to read your book. I'm super, super excited to get all the research and stats and most of all to kind of implement it personally. I know I got away a little bit from it, and I'm incorporating a lot more movement in my day to day. So this is such a great reminder for myself.
Awesome.
Who do you work with, and how can people get in touch with you?
So I work with organizations of all sizes and in all industries. I've actually worked now with over 200 organizations around the world. So large Fortune 500 companies to nonprofits. So the work that I do is primarily keynotes. I lead lots of workshops for managers and leaders. So it's called Managers on the Move series. And again, we have some published data on the impact of that workshop. And then I also offer Train the Trainer Workplace Wellness That Works training workshops for those people who are kind of boots on the ground HR and wellness, well-being people, so that they can more effectively launch movements of well-being in the organizations where they work. And then finally, I always offer messages to every individual around how each of us can kind of, given the world that we're living in, how can we respond to that so that we can become our best selves?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. So you can connect with Laura at motioninfusion.com. If you'd like to connect with me and the Unhustle movement, you can reach out at unhustle.com. I love inviting guests like Laura on this show and podcast as well, so we can continue to lead this message about well-being and health and impact and purpose, and just a very different way of how we live, work, and play, so we can create that relaxed and sustainable success. Thank you so much, Laura. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.